Well, thank you for coming back and being with us at this hour. We appreciate that. How many got all you need to eat? Would you raise your hand? How many are almost gluttonous? Would you raise your hand? Come on down front. That was good. Is Ted? Is he probably still back there with the pork? But it was good eating. There was no butter. There was no yeast rolls, but it was good. And I appreciate all those that made an effort for today to be what it's been. Let me announce this. If you come forward today to give an announcement to the preacher or go out to serve food, you will make a confession. If you come down, I'm going to take you. So you better have something on your mind when you come down, all right? But I thought we had responses this morning. They walked out the door. Well, I guess that is a response, isn't it? Had a dream last night. Kind of bothered me a little bit. In this dream was Paul and David and Steve and myself. We were all in a car. We had this accident and died and went to heaven. Got up to heaven, and the first thing we were told by the big angel up there, he said, now, the only rule we have here in heaven is don't step on any baby ducks. And there were baby ducks everywhere. I mean, it was just covered with baby ducks. Well, David Hester can't be still, as you know, and he had his red coat on, and sure enough, he backed up and stepped in the toe of a baby duck. Well, here come this angel with the ugliest woman I'd ever seen in my life. Now, bless her heart, okay? But she was just ugly. And took David's hand and her hand and says, you're bound throughout eternity together. I looked at Paul, and Paul looked at Steve, and Steve looked at me. We kind of said, yeah, no baby ducks for us. So we just stood there. But Steve couldn't be still. If you know Steve very well, you know he can't be still. And he stepped on the toe of a baby duck. Here come that angel again with another, bless her heart, and took his hand and her hand and says, you're bound throughout eternity together. Well, I was standing there and Paul was standing there, and I said, Paul, we got to be careful here. This is not good. And Paul said, I know it. But sure enough, Paul moved his foot and stepped on the toe of a baby duck, and here come that angel and the same thing. Well, I just stood there. I didn't move. I just stood there, just like that. And pretty soon this angel came in with the second prettiest girl I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, she was just knockout pretty. Took my hand, her hand, put us together, says, you're bound throughout eternity together. I turned to her and I said, what just happened? And she said all she knew was she stepped in the toe of a baby duck. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about heaven again. I'm glad they sang these songs. Weren't they good? Amen? We sing a whole lot better than we preach, don't we? If we could preach what we sing, we'd probably do a lot better. What, is that not right? You're pointing to me like I was wrong. Is everything okay? I want to go into heaven and I want to do some interviews, okay? First man I want to talk about is the man Abraham. Abraham, yes sir, how'd you get up here? It's a long story. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you his whole story. But he would say something like this. God made a promise to me a long, long time ago, way back in the book of Genesis, chapter 12. He told me I was going to have more children than there are stars in heaven. He said I'd have more children than there are sands on the seashore. And when he told me that, I didn't have the first child. Sarah was barren and she couldn't have children. And so we went on a little while because we believed God, and God told us to go to a certain place. We went and all kind of things like that, but had no children. How's God going to bless me with more children or stars in heaven with no children and a barren wife? So Sarah got up the idea, well, we need to help God out a little bit. Sarah had a handmaiden, Hagar. And she sent Hagar into Abraham to lay with her. And sure enough, she came up pregnant. Well, God never recognized the baby, Ishmael, You know, that's the problem today. Ishmael's children and Isaac's children never recognized Ishmael. I wanted to send her out and let her die in the wilderness, but God sent other ideas. After a number of years, I'm about 100, Abraham would say, and Sarah's 90, and we'd prayed to God for this child, and sure enough, God gave us a child. Sarah was pregnant. Can you imagine being pregnant at 90 years old, ladies? I can't imagine being pregnant at all, but I mean at 90 especially. And she had this baby. Abraham said, you should have seen him. He was beautiful. I love that baby. He was a promised child. He was sent from God. We called him Isaac. And I loved Isaac and would do things with Isaac. And Isaac was my guy, and we were having the best of time. But then one day, and Isaac's in his teens now, God told me something in a vision. Really bothered me. Well, what did he tell you? He said, Abraham, yes, sir. You take Isaac, the son that you love, your only son, by the way, and you take him to a certain place, to a certain mountain, I'll tell you where, and offer him as a sacrifice. I wanted to tell God, no. He's the promised child. Take me instead, but I didn't. I wanted to share it with Sarah so she could help me with this burden of taking the life of my son, but I didn't. And I got up early the next morning, took some servants with me, took Isaac with me, took the fire with me, took wood with me, and we headed off to this mountain that God was going to show us. We got to the mountain, and I told the servants, you guys stay here. The son and I will go up in the mountain, we'll worship God, and we will return. Because I knew that God could raise up children to stone if he wanted to. I didn't know what he's going to do. I didn't know how he's going to do it. But I knew God is a man of his word. And I believed God. And if he wanted me to take my son, my only son, the promised son, and offer him, I'm going to do it, even though it breaks my heart. And Isaac said to me, Daddy, here's the wood, here's the fire, but where's the sacrifice? It's like cold water poured on me. And I said back to him, God will provide the sacrifice. We went up to the top of the mountain. I laid the wood in order just like I'd been told to, just like I knew to. I bound the hands of Isaac behind his back. I laid him on top of the altar. I took out my knife. My hand was shaking and was ready to stab him to death. In fact, in my mind, I already had. But an angel of the Lord stood in my hand. And God said, now I see that you will sacrifice anything, give up anything for me. I see your faith now. And sure enough, caught on the bull in the rushes there was a ram. And I offered that ram in sacrifice. Abraham is called the father of the faithful. As I've told that story and thought about that story many, many times, what would I do if God had asked me to offer one of my girls as a sacrifice to him? What I'm reminded of is what he says in Romans chapter 12, that I present my bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is my reasonable service. And not be conformed to the world, but be different, transformed. So God offers, or asks us to offer him a sacrifice daily. Not just when we give in the contribution, but my life needs to be a living sacrifice. You know that. And so Abraham has the nickname, the father of the faithful. We leave Abraham for a minute and go to a man named David. Remember King David? Great man of God. Great soldier. He was the one who killed Goliath. Remember Goliath and the stones? Why do you have 5 stones? Why just 1 stone? That's all it took. Goliath had brothers. And David really killed the brothers too. You deny my God, you defy my God, God will destroy you. And he did destroy him. David became the great leader of Israel after Saul. Ran for his life often. David was a great king. In fact, if you're a Jew and you want to get the Jewish listening to you, you mention David. That's what Peter did in Acts chapter 2. He mentioned David, and they listened because they loved David. In fact, they thought that the Messiah would come and take David's place. He'd set up a kingdom like David had. He'll set a throne like David had. He'll sit on that throne and rule the world and run out the Romans at the time. That's what they were looking for in the Messiah. And Jesus, of course, didn't do any of that. But David, the great man of God. There's a battle going on. David's servants were fighting for him. And David one day just looked out from his palace window and there was a woman taking a bath. Now, maybe she shouldn't have been out taking a bath in her skivvies or whatever, but anyway, he looked at her and lusted after her. Her name was Bathsheba. Who is that? That's Bathsheba. Uriah the Hittite's wife. You go get her. Tell her to come visit me. And she did. And you remember the story how that they laid with each other that night and she became pregnant. Now what are you going to do? You call Uriah and tell him to come in and give him a report of how the war is going. So Uriah comes in. Has dinner with David. Okay, thank you for your report. You can go home. Go to your wife now. And so he went home. You remember what he did? Slept outside the door of the house. How can I go in and be with my wife when the men are dying for God out in the battlefield? So David invites him back the second time and gets him drunk this time. You know, when you're drunk, you just don't have your facilities like you usually would. He'll do it. He'll go with her now. And sure enough, he didn't. He again slept outside the door. So David called him in the third time. You take this note back to your commander and give it to him. Don't look at it. It was a death notice. When the battle gets real hot, you put Uriah right in front. And then when it gets really hot, withdraw the troops. Don't withdraw him. You know what's going to happen. And so he takes the message back. The battle got hot, withdrew the troops, Uriah is dead. Sends word back to David, Uriah's dead. David waits the mourning period, whatever that is, before he calls Bathsheba in to become his wife. And the baby's coming right along. Everything was fine until a prophet came. He said, King David, let me tell you a story. Yes, sir. There was a king, a wealthy king, and some friends came in to visit, and he wanted to have a banquet for them. And so he didn't want to take anything out of his flock, but there was a man living there in the community who had this one little ewe lamb. He loved that lamb. He would sleep with that lamb. He loved it like a child. And that king went and took that lamb and killed it and offered it for the guests to eat. When David heard that, his fury just engulfed him. This man deserves to die. The very idea. And the prophet said, David, you're that man. You have the vastness of the kingdom, and all that I had was this wife. That's all he had. And when you read some of the Psalms, you read David's remorse. And David's heartfelt neglect and sin. And David said, against you, O God, you only have I done this great thing. David got it finally. He had lusted. He committed adultery. He had committed murder. He tried to cover it up. But finally he recognized it and said, Lord, I've sinned against you. David had a nickname too. The man after God's own, can you finish it? Heart. We love to read the Psalms and we love to read the poetic verse of it, and especially those written by David. You can hear in his words the remorse he had and the beauty of God. But you're there. How'd you get to heaven, David? I love and serve a merciful God, one I could not escape, and one who loves me. Let's go to the New Testament just for a few minutes. I'm not going to keep you long. His name is Peter. Anytime you mention Jesus, Jesus had, we talk, let's don't have cliques in the church. Well, Jesus had a clique. He had 12 men, were kind of a clique. Then inside that 12 men, there were 3 men. I could say, Peter, you finish it. James and John. Those 3 guys with Jesus did things that the others weren't allowed to do. They saw the girl being raised from the dead. They were the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John. Peter was always there. He was kind of the head of all the apostles. Even though he doesn't say that, you find that because Peter was ready to speak up and speak out any chance he got. Peter, tell us how you got here. He said, well, I remember Jesus coming by. We were fishing one day. I was with James and John, Zebedee, their daddy. We'd fished all night long and caught nothing. And Jesus came by. He said, cast your lots. Throw your nets on the other side of the boat. Now, we were fishermen. You think we hadn't fished the other side of the boat? We'd fished the stern, we'd fished the back, we'd fished the whole boat. But because Jesus said do it, we did it. And we caught so many fish in the net that our nets began to break, and we called others, come help us bring this load in. We can't, it's too many fish. Then I knew there was something very different about this man called Jesus. He said, you follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And so we just left the fish, we left the nets, we left the boats, we followed Jesus. And we saw what he could do. We didn't know exactly what he was, we just called him a prophet. We knew he was a prophet. Didn't really grasp the fact he was the Son of God. It just didn't hit home. But we saw him work miracles. We saw him raise the dead. We saw him feed the multitude. We saw him heal the sick. Nobody had done that ever before. Not like Jesus. But I've got to tell you, Peter would say, the night before he was betrayed, or the night he was betrayed, he told us that we would all leave him, all 12 of us. We had followed him, we'd live with, we did everything together, but he said, you're going to leave me. And I told him right then, I don't know what these other guys are going to do. I know what I'll do. I'll never deny you. I'll never leave you. He said, Peter, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And Peter may have said, well, I knew in my heart that will never happen. I'll never deny you, Jesus. Jesus had gone to the garden called Gethsemane, right across from the temple. From Gethsemane, you can look down the Kidron Valley and you can see the Temple Mount. It's a beautiful garden even today. He took with him Peter, James, and John, us 3. He left us at the gate and he went further into the garden and fell on his hands and his knees and prayed. He prayed that the cup might pass from him, not his will, but God's will be done. And when he came back to us, we had been up all night. We were tired. He found us asleep. Wake up, he said. Can't you watch with an hour, just an hour? And he also said, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is so weak. He went back the second time, prayed the prayer, and the third time. And now his sweat was like drops of blood. His tears were like blood. His remorse was so great. He says, come on, my accusers are at hand. And led by Judas, the one he had dipped with, the one who said he dips with me, Judas, the keeper of the bag, Judas, the treasurer of the group, led Jews to Jesus. When he came up, he kissed Jesus on the cheek. And when Jesus spoke, everybody fell down backwards. They came with clubs and knives and all kinds of things to arrest him. I've done nothing in secret, he said. They took Jesus off to Annas, the high priest. There were actually 2 high priests at that time. There was Annas and there was Caiaphas. They were kin, but there was only supposed to be one high priest. But they took Jesus to both of them. And Peter said, I followed. Not too close, not too far away, but at a good distance, a safe distance. And I watched the trial going on about Jesus. It was kind of cool that night, and there was a fire, and I was kind of warming myself at the fire, and some little girl came up to me and says, aren't you with Jesus? And Peter would say, no, I don't know him. A little while later, I was asked about the same question. You talk like a Galilean, aren't you with Jesus? I know not the man, I said. The third time I was asked, aren't you with Jesus? And Peter said, I began to curse and to swear I didn't know Jesus. And the rooster began to crow. And Jesus turned the trial and looked right at me. And I knew what I'd done. I hung my head in shame. I cried like a baby because I denied Jesus. But that's not the end of the story, Peter would say. Even though they took Jesus to trial and execution, when he died, they laid him in a brand new tomb, tomb of Joseph Arimathea, rolled a great boulder and so no one would steal him away. Put guards outside the tomb. Nobody could steal him. But come Sunday morning, the rock had been rolled back, not so he could come out, but so we could go in and look. The women had already been to the tomb, and they said, he's risen. We didn't believe them, but we ran to the tomb. I was the last one to get there, Pete would say. And I went right in the tomb, and I saw folded the napkin over his head and the grave clothes, nicely folded. Jesus appeared to us. He'd already sent word that I'd risen. He told Mary to tell me that, and I heard that, but I just didn't grasp that. But he'd risen. Thomas wasn't with us that first Sunday. I don't know where Thomas was, but he wasn't with us. The next Sunday, Jesus appeared, and so did Thomas. He was there, and he said, come here, Thomas. Thomas had already said, if I don't put the fingers in the nail prints, or feel the nail prints, or feel the spear in his side, I won't believe. And he said, come here, Thomas. Take your finger, Thomas, and feel right there. Take your hand and feel my side, Thomas. And Thomas said, my Lord and my God. Listen to this, class. Blessed are you, Thomas, because you have seen and felt. Blessed are they, that's us, who've never seen, never felt, yet believe. That's me. Hopefully that's you. I still wasn't feeling very good, Peter would say. But after 40 days, Christ was here on earth. He ascended back to heaven. 10 days later, the day of Pentecost came. He told us we'd receive power upon high, and sure enough, the Holy Spirit came upon us apostles. We began to speak with tongues we've never studied before, languages. And if you'll look in your Bible, it's my sermon that's recorded. Jesus had forgiven me. I remember seeing Jesus on the seashore. We'd gone back fishing after he died. We smelled fish cooking, and sure enough, Jesus was cooking fish. Bring me what you got, we'll cook some more. He had told me 3 times, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. The same number of times I denied him. Jesus confessed me. I'm here because of a loving Father, willing to forgive even the gravest of sins. You know, after Christ ascended back to heaven, as I walked the streets of Jerusalem, if they wanted to get to me, really get to me, they would crow like a rooster, and I would remember what I had done. I never forgot that, even though forgiven of that. I'm here because of a loving Father. And one more, the Apostle Paul. Now, if I've been doing things, you remember the background of Paul, brought up in Jerusalem, a zealot, a Pharisee. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. I mean, keeping law, he was strict in keeping law. He said all this about himself. There's not a stronger Jew anywhere than Paul. I'd probably had Paul to go to the Jews. He had the background for it. Gamaliel being the teacher he was, he knew the law. In fact, he even said of himself, he had kept the law perfectly, which kind of hard to believe, but he said he had. Paul, how'd you get here? I understand that there was a time, Paul, and he says, yes, there was a time when I really thought that Jesus and the way was not God's way. I did everything in my power to persecute the way and those who followed the way. In fact, I remember there was a man named Stephen. He was a Christian, and I remember us throwing rocks at him. Now, I didn't throw any rocks. I did hold the coats for them. Acts 7. And I remember going to Damascus one day. I'd brought letters from to arrest people in Damascus, Christians, those who follow the way, and bring them back for trial and for execution. I was on my way with that mission in mind. And about noontime there, a bright light struck me. It wasn't the sun, it was brighter than the sun. Those with me saw the light, didn't see the man. I saw the man. His man was Jesus. Those with me heard a voice. They didn't hear Jesus' voice. And Jesus appeared to me on that road. I had a religious experience on the road to Damascus. And the Lord said to me, Saul, because that's what they call me. That was my Hebrew name. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now remember, Jesus had already ascended back to heaven. And he wasn't on earth. It wasn't him. It was the church. It was the way. The people of the way is who I was persecuting. Jesus says, that's me. And that makes sense because Ephesians tells us he's the head of the church and we're the body of the church. We're the members, the arms, the legs, the fingers. That's why he's talking about you persecuted me. When you persecute a Christian, you're persecuting Jesus. Sir, what would you have me to do? You go in Damascus, he told me, and he told you what you must do. And so I went to Damascus. When I got up, I couldn't see. I was blind. I was led to Damascus. And there in Damascus, I decided I need to pray. And 3 days of praying and fasting is what I did. And I couldn't see a thing. And a prophet was sent to me, a man of God. He said, Saul, yes, sir, why do you tarry? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins. When I stood up, it seemed like great scales filled my eyes. I could see again. And I was baptized in the death and blood of Jesus. If you remember when I wrote in my epistles, I told everyone that I was the chief of sinners. I told you one time I'd forgotten the past, but I never really forgot what I'd done. I never really forgot that I was a persecutor of the church. I never forgot that. And because of a loving, forgiving God, I'm here in heaven. I don't know if that's what these men would say if we talked to them. I've heard people say, I can't wait to get to heaven. I want to ask Paul if he wrote Hebrews or not. I want to ask Moses about the crossing the Red Sea, and I think we'll know all those things. It really won't make any difference then. But just picture yourself in heaven for a minute, okay? We're about through. Are you there in your mind? Can you look around? Streets of gold, gigantic pearls, angels, loved ones. Do you see yourself there? Just how real is this place called heaven to you this afternoon? I got to talking about yeast rolls, y'all remember that, and the butter? And I was expecting at lunch some yeast rolls and butter. I don't know why. Got it on my mind. I could almost taste it. We walked down the aisle. I could smell them cooking. I got to thinking about it. How badly do you want to go home this afternoon? Can you taste it? Can you smell it? Is it real? Or is what we're doing, we're going to be through in 5 minutes or so. That's it. I'm done. I've got my card punched for the whole week. Or is heaven a reality to you? When I was working at Faulkner, I got to go to a lot of congregations, got to speak at a lot of them, but sometimes I would be in the Bible class and they would be a Bible class and they'd want me to speak at the 11th hour, 11 o'clock hour, and I'd do that, or whichever it was. Heard a lot of sermons. I can't think of a time I visited a church that we talked about heaven. I can't think of a Bible class that we spent an hour talking about heaven. Now, that's not to say it wasn't done at those churches, but it wasn't done when I was there. Have we forgotten what's important? Have we forgotten what life is really all about? I love Solomon. I love summing things up. The whole duty of man. The whole duty of man. Fear God. Can you finish it? And do what? Keep His commandments. That's what we're here for. Not here to make a lot of money. Not here to take care of my grandkids and spoil them. I'm here to serve God and keep His commandments. So, if today was our very last day on earth, where will you spend eternity? Are you ready? There's a song that goes, there's a great day coming, a great day coming. Do you remember the song? We sang it. What's the last verse? There is a sad day coming for those who not know the Lord. If this afternoon you need to respond anyway, be baptized, confess wrong, ask for prayers, why don't you come? I know in a sterile setting like this, it's almost embarrassing. Let me tell you something. If you respond this afternoon, do you know you will affect heaven? If you respond this afternoon and need to, there'll be rejoicing by the angels in heaven. How do they know what we're doing? I don't know. But Jesus says, over one sinner that repenteth. You need to this afternoon, while we stand and while we sing the psalm encouragement.